again, everyone. Dave Thomas here, and this time I am building the Estes Space Corps Lunar Scout. This is considered an intermediate level kit, mainly because all of the parts are cardboard and it's going to require some fairly intricate painting. As with any rocket kit, we'll want to check and make sure we have all the parts before we start the assembly process. So this is actually most of the parts here. This is laser cut cardboard, and it's got a little bit of warpage to it, and so you might want to put this out with a really heavy book on top of it or something like that. Do that for a day or two to flatten this back out. Alright, and then we've got the ring here that will go on the tail section as shown up here. And then for the rest of it, we've just got a body tube and a coupler here. This kit does not have a nose cone, and it uses featherweight recovery. Okay, so we have these two, and that's shown here and here. And then we have the launch lug. Okay, but that should be everything except for the decals. Alright, so we've got some Waterslide decals here. And this is another reason why this is considered an intermediate kit, because these decals are going to be pretty intricate to be putting on. Okay, now just kind of looking ahead here, according to the instructions, they paint the whole thing last. Okay, now if you look here at the finished product, this is going to be pretty difficult to paint all these different parts if you're going to do the whole kit first and then paint the entire thing. I would highly recommend painting the individual parts first and then put those together to form the whole rocket here. Now that will have a few problems of its own. For the most part, glues do not stick well to paints, especially white or wood glue that we would normally use for this rocket. And so any place that pieces come together, like between the landing leg here and the ringtail, you'll want to take either a hobby knife or a little bit of sandpaper and kind of scrape the paint away from just that area where it's going to get glued. Okay, but even though we do have these nice multicolored decals here, they are not enough to get you to the finished product shown here. You can spray paint these, or you could brush paint them. Most people spray paint rockets, but in this case I'm going to go ahead and brush paint most of this, just to be a little bit different and to keep in practice. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do then is cut out all of these various parts, figure out where they're going to go, and then paint them. Now before I cut out the parts and start painting them, if we go back here to the painting instructions, it says to apply white primer to the whole kit first. And so I'm going to do that after I've flattened this out again, and then I'm simply going to spray primer across the entire cardboard sheet here. We don't need a heavy coating. In fact, if you get it too heavy of a coating, it's going to be difficult to cut these out. But just a really light, misty coating of that. Let that dry, flip it over, and then do the same thing here. And then if need be, if any of the primer needs touched up, I can do that using some brush-on primer and fix that as I go along. But once the primer's dried, then I'll go ahead and cut these out. For the ringtail, the body tube, and the coupler here, as well as the launch lug, those also will get primed before we put the model together. I put my piece of cardstock here underneath a heavy book overnight, and that got rid of most of the waviness. There's still a little bit there. And then I sprayed this with some flat white primer, just a thin coat, and so you can still see all the cutouts and such, which will make the job of removing these easier. And now it's just a matter of going through each piece and cutting off the little tabs like this. And then you may need to do a little bit of light sanding to remove the tabs, and as well as to remove some of the soot from the laser cutting there. Don't do a whole lot. You don't want to wear these down, and you may have to do more sanding later to make them fit. So I'm going to continue this off camera and get all of the pieces cut out. I have all my pieces cut out, and now I'm going to refer to the illustration that came with the rocket for the paint scheme, and I'm going to pre-paint most of these parts before I assemble the rocket. Now, usually when I'm building model rockets, I use wood glue because of its strength and its relatively short drying time. However, wood glue dries to a yellow color, and if I'm pre-painting everything here, I don't want to have to overpaint the glue once I put it on there. So here I'm going to use either white glue or a clear glue like gel type super glue to put this together. I've painted all of the parts now, and for the most part they came out okay. I do want to point out this little guy here. Let's see if we can get the focus. I identified this as a launch lug, and it is launch lug material. This will actually be the center of the antenna, and so it does need to be painted gold. And as we'll see here as we go through the assembly, the launch lug is actually built into these rings. So coming back to our instructions, our first job is to assemble the landing legs. So we'll need one of those, and then one of these little cross pieces. Okay, and then one of these discs with the cross-cut pattern in it, and then one of the small solid discs here. Alright, this can be put aside. And for this, since I've painted these, I am going to use super glue to put them together. And I think for the most part you can just use regular super glue. There may be some parts, and I know there are coming up ahead, that require fillets. And so anything that requires fillets, I will probably use the gel type super glue for those. Okay, so first of all, we are going to put in this cross piece here. Alright, so I'm just going to start by putting a little bit of super glue just along the edge. It's actually kind of spilling over more than I want to. And we may find that it's easier to put the glue on afterward and just let it seep into the cracks. Alright, but one of the things that needs to happen here is that these pieces have to be flush, so we form this little interior cross piece, and that's going to fit into our gold one there. Okay, and I'll come back, we'll see how that holds after the glue sets up and see whether or not we have to come back to it. Now to put the first part of the landing pad on, here I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the outside edges of that cross piece, and not on the actual cross piece itself, the raised area there. Okay, and so this will go on here. and I'm just going to hold that for a few seconds and let the glue grab. Okay, and then for the pad, I'm going to go ahead and just put a dab of glue right about in the middle here. And then this piece will go in right on the center. I'm just going to press down for a few seconds on that. Okay, so your cross piece should look something like this at this point. And again, if you don't paint it ahead of time, you can use wood glue or white glue for this. So now I'm going to do this 2 more times with the other 2 legs, but I'll do that off camera and then come back. While the landing legs are drying, our next step here is to cut out the fin marking guide and mark the body tube. And this is on the very front page of the instructions. Okay, and where it's at is not going to run into anything we still need. So I'm just going to quickly cut this out. Okay, and then we simply wrap this around the tube. Alright, and line things up. Now, this is a small tube and I have big fingers. Okay, so we want to line up those tick marks. And then just take a small piece of tape here to hold it in place. And I'm just going to scoot it up just a little bit. Well, fine, it doesn't want to scoot. Okay, so now I'm just going to make a little mark here on each side of each of those lines. Okay, and now we're going to extend those lines all the way up the body tube. Now classically, people have used door frames to do this, and that's shown in the instructions as well. But since door frames are really hard to put under a video camera, I'm using this fin marking guide that Estes makes. And it's just really a whole bunch of straight edges at different depths. But now we go ahead and connect the 2 marks and extend that line all the way down the tube. Okay, now I did pre-paint my tube white. And so depending on how well these lines erase, I may have to overpaint them again a little bit. Probably have to use brush paints for that. Okay, and now we need the B and A ring, or B rings here. Okay, so these look like this, and I've got a little bit of paint there on this one. I'm just going to trim that off. Okay, and check any other places where we have some excessive paint. There we go. bit just inside there. And check that one, it looks pretty good. Okay, so first we need to simply dry fit these. Okay, and that's showing me there's a little bit too much paint in here. I'm using my knife more as a scraper to do this. Okay, so there's one. And it's because of the paint that this is so tight there. So you may need to use a little bit of sandpaper. This is 400 grit, way too big at the moment. And here I'm just sanding a little bit on the inside of the ring to knock down some of the excess paint there. Okay, and I can gently push that upward. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing here, and I'm going to go ahead and just sand that. Now we'll start by scraping it now, and we'll see if we need to sand it. Alright, and then we'll just use a little sandpaper again in here. This one also will go onto the body tube. Okay. So the first thing is to go ahead and line these up, and I'm just lining up the notches here with the line that we drew. Okay, now the reason we haven't glued these is because when we put a leg on, alright, it's going to fit into the two slots there. Actually got that pretty close. Okay, so it's going to go like that, and you can see it's kind of bending there. And then the leg has to come down so that it is flush with the aft end of the body tube. Okay, so about like that. And before I do any gluing, I'm going to go all the way around with the other legs and make sure that these are straight. But I'm going to do that off camera. Here I have all my legs dry fitted in place. Okay, and so again we just want to make sure everything is flush with the aft end of the body tube. And according to the instructions, these rings here will get glued in place by using fillets. We're not going to glue them at this moment. But we will go ahead and glue the legs on by their edges, and then also add fillets to those. Now, as I mentioned before, we can do the gluing with super glue of the regular consistency. But then to do the fillets, we're probably going to want to use some gel type super glue. Now the other thing I'm going to do at this point is see how well I can erase these lines. Okay, and really you don't need the lines at all anymore. because as long as you line up these slots here, you're going to be fine. And so I think what I'm going to do here is go ahead and scoot these around. I'm going to leave the, well, no, I really don't need to leave the lines. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and erase these lines, and then we'll come back and put this together, because it turns out you don't need them. Okay, it turns out that you really only need one line here so that you can do the initial lineup of the rings, but after that they'll all be self-aligning. So I've erased most of my pencil marks here, and I'll still have to do a little bit of touch-up, but this gets rid of a little bit of the work. And I've just applied a little bit of super glue here to this edge. Now I'm just going to put that on. Okay, now if you hadn't painted your legs to begin with, then you can go ahead and use white glue or wood glue on this. And here I'm just going to hold this. Got a little excess glue there, but we'll cover that up with the fillets. Alright. Now I'm going to repeat this with the other two legs, and I'll do that off camera. And so I'll come back when all the legs are on. So the glue on the landing legs is dry here, and we can compare this to the master template. Okay, and it does require a little bit of bending of the legs, but everything's in alignment here. And the other thing to make sure of is that the round holes on these rings, that at least one set's in alignment. They should all be, but that's what we'll use as the launch lug later on. So next, the instructions tell us to put on some fillets. And I'm going to go ahead and try this with some regular consistency super glue here. They're not going to be really big. In fact, it's attempting to run through there. And I think we can just let that happen. Okay. And then I'm just going to come down again here and just kind of let capillary action do the work for me. And then do the opposite side. Now, I'm only going to do this one face at a time so that I can put this horizontal to dry. I don't want everything to run down to the bottom. Okay, and then we're going to put a little bit around the rings there. Alright, and I'm going to let this dry in this position, and then I'll repeat the process for the other two faces off camera. My fillets have dried, and I applied those to each of the landing struts where it goes up against the body tube, and also to the rings here. I've also applied fillets to the outer seams here of the reinforcement pieces for the landing pads. I didn't do the inside surfaces because the glue was being soaked into those openings by capillary action, and I didn't see any need to add more glue. Our next step is to add the detail parts, and so starting here with part number G, or part letter G, okay, which are these kind of streamlined looking guys, kind of look like little spaceships themselves. Alright, and these are going to go on these little tabs here with the interior curve going up against the body tube there, and then this is supposed to just pop onto that little nub there. We may have to do a little bit of sanding and trimming. So first I'll just take out anything that might be hanging in here. Alright, let's do this right here. Okay, so that's just going to fit right there. And so here again, I'm going to use a little bit of super glue. I'll decide if one side's looking a little better than the others. Looks like it's pretty much the same. And here I'm just going to let capillarity again just draw onto the inside surface of this, and then go ahead and put it back on, preferably without sticking my fingers together. Okay. A little bit of a gap there. I think I moved legs. There we go. Okay, so that should go on like that. And now I'm going to go off camera and do the other two. Now I have the first two of those trim pieces on, and I just want to show you something here. In some cases you may have to remove a little bit of a lip here that the paint may have formed along the edge. And so I'm just going to take my hobby knife here and just very lightly trim that. And this is why you want to friction fit it before you glue it. Because one of the things I found was that it was tight enough that I was bending the edges outward, which made it even harder to get the piece on. Alright, so now if I put this on, if I put it on the right direction, alright, that fits nicely. And now I can glue that on. And something else I found here is that you can just take the super glue and just let it draw itself into that crack there. And it should seat itself in there quite nicely. Now the next piece to go on is the ringtail here. And for this we're going to want to have our overall template again. This will tell us how far we need to bend things. So this simply fits into these tabs. And here I'm just going to start by just barely pushing them in. And now I'm going to put them on the template here. And this will tell me if I'm bowed out in one direction or another. Okay, I've still got a little bit of a bend to that leg. There we go. Okay, so that's close. Now I'm going to go ahead and push this in. And once more, since I've got painted surfaces here, the super glue actually works better than the white glue. Okay, and now I'm going to come back and adjust this some more. And so we can just gradually move things along the ring until we're pretty close to even there. Okay? And then once more, I'm going to put in just a little bit of super glue here. And that's going to soak in to the crack. It'll just draw it in. And I'll just go around each side here. Now one of the drawbacks you can see from painting this ahead of time is some of the paint can get scraped from one part to the next. And that may require some touch-up. Okay, and now I'm going to hold this horizontally for a little bit so that the glue doesn't all run down to the bottom. I would not suggest using any type of accelerator on this. I've found that the accelerators make the glue kind of hazy looking, and I don't want that. I want to keep the clear appearance of the glue so that you really don't notice it. For the next part, we need to glue this coupler, which also kind of acts like a nose cone, into the body tube itself. And we need to measure 10 millimeters from one end. Or 1 centimeter, that's going to be right there. Okay, and now we're going to glue that into the main body tube. Okay, now here we have a painted surface, but the interior of the body tube is unpainted. And this makes it difficult for both types of glue. So the wood glue won't want to stick to the paint, and the regular super glue won't want to stick to the cardboard. Actually it sticks, but it just all soaks in. It doesn't form a good bond. Now I've marked the nose piece here at 1 centimeter, and now we're going to install this. And here I'm going to use some thick super glue. And just run a bead of that around the inside. Okay. And then I'm going to push this in and twist it back and forth a little bit to spread the glue until I get right to my mark there. Next, we need to put on these little pieces here, and these go onto the tabs right here on the top of each of those lander legs. And what I can do here, you can either apply some glue to the lander leg first, or what I'm going to do is just pop this into place like this, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of super glue on and let it soak through the cracks there by capillary action, and that will glue itself in place. Now there is supposed to be a little gap here right at the top, and there's another piece that's going to go into that little tiny slot right there. So I'm going to finish this up all the way around, and then when I come back we'll put on the top pieces. With the solar panel pieces on, the next pieces go on are these ones, and these will go alongside here. So it's that little tab right there is going to fit into the last remaining notch on the little solar panel gadget there, and then that will glue up against the tube. I've got a little bit of paint there. I'm just going to scrape that off. And then again, I'm going to use just a thin film of super glue here. And just a little bit on that tab. And then that goes in here. Okay. Alright, now mine's going just a little bit above the nose piece. If you get done and yours is up like that, you can either sand it off or just leave it the way it is. Okay, and again we're going to repeat that on the other two. Now one of these is a little bit bigger, it looks like this, and this is going to be for the antenna assembly. And here I'm going to put this together before I put it on. You can do it either way. But I'm going to try it this way. So here again I'm going to scrape off any excess paint on the edge. Okay, now the little launch lug looking doohickey there is going to go in between those two slots. Alright, and before I glue that, I do want to check something here. Let's make sure that it goes into the antenna dish without hanging up, because we do have the paint thickness there. Yeah, so I'm going to need to scrape that out just a little bit. Now you don't want to scrape it too much because you want a good firm bond there. There we go. So that's going to fit in. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and just put a little dab of some of the super glue in the little slots there. Okay, and then add that middle piece. I'm just going to kind of turn it around in there to spread the glue well. Alright, and then there's a tab here that's going to go in the vertical slot down here. And before I glue it, I'm just going to set it in place and then apply the glue to it afterward. There we go. Okay, so with that in place, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue right there and a little bit of glue around the antenna, like that. Okay, and you may want to let that dry. Depends on how good you are at not gluing your fingers together. Okay, so here I'm going to run just a little bit of glue down there and on that tab again. And then take the whole thing and glue it to the rocket. Okay, and at this point I'm just going to let everything dry for a while before going on to finishing the decals. The final steps on our rocket here are to apply the Waterslide decals, and I'm not going to do all of these on camera, I just want to do an example here. So these three long ones are going to go along the ringtail here on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and cut one of these out. And here a transparent ruler can be helpful so you can place it over the decal and still see where you're cutting. Okay, and the idea is to cut just beyond here, and then if you need to, you can trim it. But it's really hard to make it bigger again if you've trimmed it too small. And I can place this up against the ringtail there and see how close I am. Okay, so I've got this little bit right here. I'm going to need to trim that down a bit more. So there's not going to be a lot of unused edge on this decal. I also want to be very careful I don't cut into any of the color of the decal. Okay, so I'll try this again. Alright, that should fit. And now I've just got a little tray here of room temperature water. And I like to place them in face down, and you can see the water moving into the paper this way. Most of the time, if you do it this way, by the time the middle is completely soaked there, it's ready to come out. Okay. And now I'm going to test this by simply trying to move it so it should slide here. I'm going to put that back in just a little bit. Looks like the middle's not quite ready to go. Okay, so what I'm going to do here now is very carefully, I've slid just a little bit of the decal off one end. And I'm using my other thumb here to keep everything moving at the same speed so I don't buckle or tear it. Okay, and now I'm just going to place that end right against the edge there. And now I'm just going to pull the backing away. Okay, and if you got any little wrinkles and such, you can just take a little piece of tissue or even a very small sponge. I'm just going to get this a little bit damp, and I can use that now, kind of squeegee out the air. But you want to do this wet. If you try and just do this with a dry finger or something like that, a lot of times you can end up ripping the decal. Okay, and then as long as it's wet, you can reposition it if you need to. I'm just slightly crooked here, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to push my luck too far here. Alright, and then go on to the next one. Okay, and I'm going to finish mine off camera, but this rocket is done. Have a great launch, a safe recovery, and you'll see me on the next video. Now, although my rocket is built, I do want to show you some alternative techniques that you could use with this. And primarily I'm looking at the decals and how these could be applied before we assemble the rocket. Okay, so if you want to do this with the ringtail here, what I recommend is first putting that onto this template and getting it as circular as possible. And then first of all, just mark where each of the legs are going to be. Now I have painted this one already, and this is something if you're going to add the decals on in this fashion, you will have to paint the parts before you put the rocket together. Alright, but now I simply have a little mark telling me where each one of those decals will go, and now I can put the wraps on here and get them spaced nice and even before I even put this on the rocket. The same is true with some of the other trim pieces. So for example, the little solar cells here that are up on this part of the finished rocket, those could go on to these pieces as well. But you do need to be careful because remember when we assembled the rocket, this is where we glued. Okay, so this is the top of the landing leg has a little tab that fits through this slot. And so if this is covered with a decal, it means you can't work from above like I showed you before. Okay, it's not a big deal. It's something you can work around. Just be aware of it. And then the landing legs can have their decals applied early too. And that's especially interesting to me because when I got to looking at these to apply them to the already built rocket, I could see where my fingers were going to have a hard time getting them on straight and such. And if I had realized just how tight it would be getting in there, I definitely would have put these on the legs first. And so I am working on a duplicate rocket, and I'm going to try it both ways here. So this is the one I've built already, and aside from the leg ones, it's done. And I may or may not end up putting all of the leg decals on, just because my fingers are kind of thick and clumsy in there. So here I have one of the ring decals. I'm going to go ahead and set that in here to soak. Alright, and again, this does have to be painted before we do this. You don't want to try and put Waterslide decals onto a non-painted surface. Okay, and that's just ready to go. So here, I'm going to make sure to leave myself a little bit of room for the leg. Alright, but there's my mark on that side. I've got one on this side. Okay, now I can just squeegee off the water there. Okay, and I've got that pretty well centered between the two lines. And I can continue this with the other two going around and then go ahead and install this onto the legs. In this example, I am taking one of the solar panel decals here and I'm going to apply it to this gold piece. And so in a similar fashion here, we'll just let that soak, and this one should take a lot less time. Alright, yep, and it is ready to go. So here I'm just going to apply it to that. Apply this to the end and pull back. And then simply center it across there. Okay, let's see if I can get this to show up. Well, on focus. There we go. Okay, so over the slot that's cut in the middle of this, we just have the decal material, and you may run into problems where whatever glue you're using may dissolve the decal. So you want to be very careful about placing it very quickly and right the first time, so we don't end up with the glue shifting underneath the decal and causing it to shift as well. And here I have an example of one of the landing leg decals. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick that in the water. Okay, and then these can go on in either direction. They're the same either way. Got a little bit of a fold going there. I need to straighten out. Okay. And here I'm going to put these parallel to the line, lower line of the landing leg here. Still got a little bit of a fold in that, but I'm going to ignore it for the moment. Okay, and so that's a way that you can go ahead and put the decals on beforehand. I think it is quite a bit easier, but you will have to be a little bit more careful when we put the glue on so that we don't accidentally melt or dissolve a decal there. So thanks for watching, and you'll see me next time.